I made my daughter apologize to her teacher, and now she's not speaking to me. It was supposed to be a learning moment, a small life lesson for my daughter, Emily, to understand the consequences of her actions. But what I didn't expect was that it would cost me my relationship with her, at least for now. After an incident at school, I made the decision to ask Emily to apologize to her teacher, hoping it would teach her responsibility and respect. But instead, I became the villain in my daughter's eyes. She hasn't spoken to me since, and now I'm left wondering if I did the right thing or if I just made a terrible mistake. This is the story of how trying to teach my daughter accountability almost cost me her trust. It all started one morning when I dropped Emily off at school. She seemed unusually quiet, which wasn't like her. She is normally bubbly, always chatting away about something or another. But that morning, she barely said goodbye before rushing off to join her friends. I didn't think much of it at the time. Maybe she was just tired or distracted. Later that afternoon, I received an email from her teacher. I opened it, expecting the usual updates about class activities, but what I read made my stomach drop. Apparently, Emily had been disrespectful during class. She had spoken out of turn, interrupted the teacher multiple times, and even rolled her eyes when asked to pay attention. Her teacher was concerned and asked that I address the behavior at home. The email ended with a polite but firm note asking me to remind Emily of the importance of showing respect in class. I felt a wave of anger and disappointment wash over me. This wasn't the Emily I knew. Sure, she had her moments. What kid doesn't? But this seemed out of character. I immediately called her into the living room when she got home from school, wanting to get to the bottom of it. "Emily," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "I got an email from your teacher today. She's really upset about how you acted in class." Her face dropped, and she looked guilty, but only for a moment. "I didn't do anything wrong," she muttered, looking away. I couldn't believe it. "What do you mean? The teacher said you were disrespectful, that you interrupted the class and didn't listen when she asked you to pay attention." "I was just talking to my friend," she protested. "It wasn't a big deal. Mrs. Langley was being way too strict." I felt my frustration rising. "It is a big deal, Emily. This isn't how we behave at school. You can't just ignore authority and act like it's nothing. You're there to learn and to show respect." At that point, I knew I had to act. I wasn't going to let her off the hook. If she was going to learn a lesson from this, it would come from understanding the consequences of her actions. "Tomorrow, you're going to apologize to Mrs. Langley. You're going to take responsibility for what you did." Her eyes widened in shock. "What? You're making me apologize?" "Yes," I said firmly. "You're going to apologize for being disrespectful. That's what you do when you make a mistake. You own up to it and make it right." She crossed her arms, her face tightening. "But I don't want to. She's always picking on me. I'm not sorry." That's when I realized the depth of her frustration. It wasn't just the behavior that had bothered her. It was the feeling that she was being unfairly treated. But I couldn't back down now. This was about teaching her accountability, not just letting her get away with acting out. "You may not want to, but you will," I said, voice unwavering. "This is about learning respect for others, especially your teacher. Now, go to your room and think about what you're going to say. Tomorrow, we'll go to school together, and you'll apologize." The next day was tense. Emily had barely spoken to me since our conversation the night before. She wasn't upset with me in the typical teenage way, but more so with the situation as a whole. She felt like she was being punished for something she didn't think was a big deal, and I could tell she was struggling to process what I was asking her to do. We arrived at school a little earlier than usual. As I parked the car, I could feel the weight of the moment. Emily sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, arms crossed. I could tell she was nervous, but she didn't say anything. She hadn't even agreed to the apology. She was just going through the motions, doing what I asked because she didn't feel like she had much of a choice. I turned to her, trying to keep my tone supportive, yet firm. "Listen, I know this isn't easy, but it's important. Apologizing doesn't make you weak. It makes you strong. It shows that you can admit when you've made a mistake and that you're willing to make things right. I know this is hard, but I promise you'll feel better once it's over." Emily didn't reply. She just nodded, though I could tell she wasn't fully convinced. We walked inside, and I could feel the tension building with each step. We made our way to Mrs. Langley's classroom, and I knocked gently on the door. When the teacher opened it, she greeted us with a warm smile, though I could see the curiosity in her eyes. She must have been wondering why we were there earlier than usual. "Good morning, Mrs. Langley," I said, trying to keep the situation as normal as possible. "This is Emily, and we're here because she wants to apologize for her behavior in class yesterday." Emily looked down at the floor, clearly embarrassed. She mumbled a soft "sorry" under her breath, but it was clear she wasn't fully owning up to the situation yet. Mrs. Langley, bless her, could see right through it. She kneeled down in front of Emily, making the apology feel more personal and less like a formal chore. "It's okay, Emily," she said gently. "I understand you're not happy with how things went, but I appreciate you coming in to apologize. I just want you to remember that when we act out, it can affect the whole class, and it's important to keep that in mind." Emily didn't say anything, but I could see her posture relax a little. Mrs. Langley wasn't angry. She wasn't holding a grudge. She was just trying to teach a lesson, and I could see Emily finally beginning to understand that. I stepped in, adding, "I just want you to remember, Emily, this wasn't about punishing you. It was about teaching responsibility. You did the right thing by coming in and apologizing. This is how we learn and grow." She gave a small nod, and Mrs. Langley gave her a reassuring smile. "You're a good kid, Emily. Don't worry about this too much. Just try to be mindful next time." As we left the classroom, I felt a sense of relief. Emily had apologized and it was over, or so I thought. The ride home was quiet. Emily didn't say a word to me as we drove back. She seemed distant, her eyes staring out the window again, lost in her thoughts. I had hoped that after the apology, things might get back to normal, that she would understand why I made her do it, but it wasn't the case. The silence between us was deafening, and I could feel the distance growing. When we got home, I tried to talk to her. "How do you feel about it? I know it wasn't easy, but I hope you understand why I had you do it." Emily just shrugged, still not looking at me. "I guess, but I don't think it made any difference. Mrs. Langley probably doesn't even care." I felt a pang of frustration. I had spent the last couple of days stressing about how to make sure she understood the importance of accountability. And this was the response I got? I wasn't expecting her to be thrilled about it, but I had hoped for something more than this cold indifference. "Emily, it's not about Mrs. Langley," I said, trying to keep my tone calm. "It's about doing the right thing. It's about owning up to your actions and learning from them." "I don't need a lecture, Dad," she muttered. "I just don't get why I had to apologize. I didn't even think what I did was that bad." I knew I had to tread carefully here. I had to get through to her without pushing too hard. "Look, I know you didn't think it was that bad, but imagine how it felt for Mrs. Langley and the other students. When you act out in class, it affects the whole group. It's about being responsible for your actions and understanding how they impact others." She was silent for a moment, and I thought she might finally understand. But then she sighed and said, "I still think it was dumb. It's just one little mistake. Why does it matter so much?" That was the moment it hit me. Emily didn't see the bigger picture. She didn't understand how important it was to take responsibility, to apologize when you've hurt someone, even if it's not obvious to you why they're upset. I was trying to teach her a valuable lesson, but she wasn't ready to learn it yet. The next few days were tough. Emily barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was short and dismissive. She avoided eye contact, didn't want to engage in any of our usual conversations. It was like I had become the enemy in her eyes. The more I thought about it, the more I started to question if I had done the right thing. Was it too harsh to make her apologize? Maybe I had pushed her too far. But then again, I couldn't just let her get away with disrespecting others. She had to learn responsibility. I was torn. I couldn't tell if I had done the right thing by standing my ground, or if I had ruined our relationship in the process. It didn't take long for the full extent of the fallout to become clear. Emily's behavior toward me grew colder with each passing day. She stopped talking to me altogether, except for the occasional response when I asked her to do something. She used to ask me about my day, joke around, and even talk about school, but now there was nothing but silence. Even when we had dinner together, she barely looked up from her phone, and when she did, her eyes seemed distant, almost angry. I was beginning to feel like I had lost her. As a father, that was the most painful thing I had ever felt. I didn't know how to fix it, and it seemed like the harder I tried, the more she pushed me away. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. We had planned to go out for breakfast, a tradition we'd had for years. Emily always loved these outings. They were our time to talk, to connect, and to enjoy each other's company. But that day when I asked if she was ready, she just shook her head and muttered, "I'm not going." "Why not?" I asked, confused. "Because I don't want to," she replied flatly. "I don't want to be around you right now." Her words cut through me like a knife. I had been doing everything I could to make things right, but it seemed like it was never enough. I couldn't even take her out for breakfast without her shutting me down. I stood there for a moment, stunned. I didn't know how to respond. Emily, please. This isn't about me being mad at you. I'm trying to help you understand that actions have consequences, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I just want us to be okay. But she just turned away, went back to her room, and shut the door behind her. I felt like a failure. Was this really what standing up for her, teaching her responsibility, had done? I wasn't sure I could take much more of this. I wanted to be the supportive father she needed, but she was pushing me away at every turn. That afternoon, I sat in my office, staring at the paperwork on my desk, but my mind kept wandering back to Emily. I kept thinking about all the little things I'd missed, like how she used to smile when I walked into a room, or how we'd laugh about something silly. I missed her. The real her, not the cold version I was seeing now. I realized that, despite my best intentions, I hadn't really been listening to her. I'd been focused on what I thought she needed to learn, what I thought was best for her, but I had neglected her feelings. The truth was, she wasn't just upset about the apology. I had made her feel like her voice didn't matter. In my effort to teach her a lesson, I had ignored her perspective entirely. I needed to make it right. But how? I couldn't just demand she speak to me again, or expect everything to go back to normal overnight. I knew I had to approach her differently, give her the space to express how she felt, and listen to her. Really listen. That evening after dinner, I knocked gently on her door. "Emily," I called softly. There was no answer, but I could hear her moving inside. I waited for a few seconds and then gently opened the door. She was sitting on her bed, her phone in hand, but she looked up at me when she saw me standing there. "Can we talk?" I asked, my voice quieter than usual. She didn't immediately respond. I could see the wall she had put up, and I didn't want to push her too hard, but I also knew that if I didn't make an effort to talk, things would only get worse. "I know I messed up," I began, sitting down at the edge of her bed. "I didn't listen to you, Emily. I was so focused on teaching you a lesson that I ignored how you were feeling, and for that, I'm really sorry." She stared at me for a moment, then finally set her phone down. "You don't get it, Dad. I don't need lessons or punishments. I just want you to trust me." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought I was doing what was best for her, but in reality, I hadn't trusted her enough to make her own decisions, or understand why she acted the way she did. "I do trust you, Emily, but trust also means I need to guide you when I think you're making mistakes," I replied, trying to explain. "But I should have listened more. I should have asked you why you acted the way you did instead of just telling you what to do." She looked at me, her eyes softening a little. It feels like you don't really understand me sometimes. Like, you think I'm just a kid who needs to be controlled. I don't need that, Dad." I sat there, letting her words sink in. I realized how much I had been pushing her away by being too authoritarian, too focused on correcting her instead of understanding her needs and emotions. She wasn't a child who needed to be fixed. She was growing, learning, and figuring things out on her own, and I needed to trust her more. "I hear you," I said finally. "I'll do better, Emily. I'll listen to you more, and I'll give you the space you need." She didn't say anything at first, but after a long pause, she nodded. "I just want things to be normal again." That was all I needed to hear. We weren't going to fix everything in one conversation, but it was a start. For the first time in weeks, I felt like there was hope for us to heal. The following days weren't perfect, but they were better. Emily and I still had our moments of silence, but there were also moments where we started to talk again, to reconnect. She wasn't quite ready to jump back into the old routine, but I could feel the walls slowly coming down. One evening, after dinner, we watched a movie together, something we hadn't done in weeks. It felt like a small victory, just sitting there next to her, laughing at the funny parts and not worrying about what had been said or done in the past. I still noticed how hesitant she was to fully engage, but it was a start. It was clear that Emily was trying to forgive me, but trust was going to take time, and I understood that now. I couldn't just expect everything to go back to the way it was immediately, but the little steps were encouraging. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to really listen to her. I started asking about her day without jumping in with advice or trying to fix things. I let her vent when she needed to, and I stopped assuming I always knew best. Slowly, she began to open up again. We talked about school, about her friends, about everything that was going on in her life. And every time we did, I felt more like the father I wanted to be, the one who listened, supported, and trusted. But then one day, Emily came to me with a question that shook me to my core. "Dad, I know I've been distant," she said, sitting down next to me. "But I've been thinking about it, and I think I understand why you made me apologize. But why didn't you trust me to handle it on my own?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had been so focused on making her understand the importance of accountability that I hadn't stopped to think about how my actions were undermining her own ability to solve problems. I had taken away the opportunity for her to handle the situation herself, to learn from her own mistakes. "I was afraid you wouldn't learn the lesson," I said honestly. "I wanted to make sure you understood that actions have consequences. But I think I forgot that sometimes you need the chance to figure things out on your own." Emily nodded, her expression soft. "I get that now. But I need you to trust me more, not just when I'm doing everything right, but even when I mess up. I need to know that you're not just going to step in and fix everything." I sat there, taking in what she was saying. She was right. I needed to trust her, not just with the small things, but with the bigger decisions, the ones where I might not have all the answers. I had been so focused on being the parent who had all the solutions that I had forgotten that sometimes my job was simply to be there, to support her, and let her find her own way. "I'll work on that," I said, my voice steady but full of emotion. "I promise I'll trust you more, Emily. I just want you to feel like I'm there for you, no matter what." Her smile was small but genuine. It felt like a step forward, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were starting to heal. The days after that conversation were surprisingly peaceful. There was still a sense of distance, but it wasn't as painful as before. Emily started to return to her old self, at least in some ways. She smiled more, talked to me more, and even started engaging in family activities again. I could feel the trust slowly building back up between us, but I knew that this was just the beginning of a much longer journey. It was a Friday afternoon when I got a text from Emily while I was at work. I'd been so focused on my own work and the distance between us that I almost didn't see the message pop up on my phone. When I opened it, it read, "I'm sorry I've been distant. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I just want you to know that I love you. I'm trying to understand better too." I sat there for a moment, rereading her message. I didn't expect an apology. I didn't expect her to be the one to initiate healing, but there it was. Her way of telling me that she was ready to move forward, even if she wasn't sure exactly how yet. I typed back quickly, my heart swelling with relief. "I love you too, Emily, and I'm proud of you. We're going to figure this out together." That simple exchange made a world of difference. It was the first time in a while that I felt like we were on the same page again. That weekend, we went to the park together. We hadn't done something so simple in months, but it felt good. It felt normal. We walked, talked, and laughed, just like we used to. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. I didn't know how long it would take to completely rebuild the trust we'd lost, but I knew we were making progress. As we sat on a bench, watching the sunset, Emily turned to me and said, "Dad, I know I messed up, but I've learned a lot from this, about myself, about you, and about the way we treat each other." I smiled at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I'm proud of you, Emily. You're growing up into someone I'm really proud of. Even when things are hard, we're both learning." She nodded, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the tension. I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells. We were finally moving forward, and the future seemed a little less uncertain. It was about a month later when I received a call from Emily's teacher. At first, I didn't think much of it. Teachers often call with updates or reminders about school events. But when I saw the number pop up on my phone, I could feel my heart rate pick up. Was this about something else? Had Emily messed up again? I answered the call, trying to keep my voice calm. "Hello? Hi, Mr. Turner. This is Mrs. Langley, Emily's teacher," she said, her voice steady but kind. "I wanted to talk to you about something that happened in class today. It's actually a good thing, and I think it's important for you to know." I let out a breath of relief. "Okay, what's going on?" Well, today Emily stood up in class during a discussion, and she really impressed me. She spoke up about how important it is to listen to others and show respect, especially when people have different opinions. She actually used the example of a conversation we had a while ago about responsibility, and I thought it was a really mature perspective. My mouth dropped open in surprise. Emily had been quiet and reserved in class before, but I had no idea she was taking in lessons like that, especially the ones I'd tried to teach her. Wow, that's really great. I'm glad to hear that. Yes, Mrs. Langley continued. I just wanted to tell you that I've seen a big change in her attitude lately. She's been more engaged in class, more thoughtful with her responses. I thought you'd like to hear that. I felt a smile spread across my face. Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Langley. That means a lot. We chatted for a few more minutes, and then I hung up, my heart full. This wasn't just about Emily behaving well. This was about her learning something deeper, something I had been trying to teach her for so long. She had finally understood the lesson, and it wasn't just something I imposed on her. It was something she had absorbed and internalized. When I told Emily about the call later that evening, she blushed, but didn't say much. I could tell she was proud of herself, but she was also a little shy about it. I gave her a hug. I'm really proud of you, kiddo, I said, my voice full of warmth. You did an amazing job, and I'm glad to see you growing. She looked up at me, a small smile on her face. Thanks, Dad. I guess I'm starting to get it. And in that moment, I knew we had come a long way. The rift between us wasn't completely healed, but it was finally starting to feel like we were moving in the right direction. As the weeks went by, I could feel the distance between Emily and me shrinking, bit by bit. The awkwardness of our past conversations started to fade, replaced by the old rhythm we once had. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. We spent more time together, watching movies, going for walks, or simply sitting in the kitchen talking about her day. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was getting my daughter back. She had also started doing better in school. Her grades were improving, and her teachers had noticed a positive shift in her attitude. I was proud of her. She was starting to take responsibility for her actions, understanding that what she did in class had an impact not just on herself, but on the people around her. One afternoon, Emily came to me with a surprise. She had made something for me. I made this, she said, holding out a small piece of paper with a drawing on it. It's for you. I took it from her, surprised by the gesture. On the paper was a picture of the two of us, sitting at the dinner table, laughing. It was simple, but the message was clear. She had drawn us, not as father and daughter in conflict, but as a team. I smiled at her, feeling a warmth spread through me. This is beautiful, Emily. Thank you, she shrugged, her cheeks flushing. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for being so distant. I've been thinking a lot about everything. That was all I needed to hear. The apology, the art, it all spoke volumes. We were on the mend. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But we were taking steps forward, together. A few months had passed since the initial fallout, and though there were still occasional moments of tension, I felt like we had reached a turning point in our relationship. Emily was more open with me now, and I could tell that she was starting to trust me again. We talked more, laughed together, and shared moments that reminded me of how things used to be. But I also knew that rebuilding trust and understanding had taken a lot of work from both sides. We had our ups and downs, and some days felt harder than others. There were still times when I caught myself slipping into old habits, wanting to fix everything for Emily, stepping in before she could handle things on her own. But I was learning, slowly but surely, how to step back and let her grow, even when it was difficult for me to watch. One evening after dinner, Emily and I sat on the couch together. It was one of those peaceful nights where nothing special was happening, but everything felt right. We were watching a movie, not talking much, just enjoying each other's company. And then, out of nowhere, Emily said, Dad, I want to thank you for everything you've done. I know I've been tough to deal with, but I'm starting to see things differently now. I get why you pushed me to apologize that day. Her words caught me off guard, and I paused the movie to look at her. You do? Yeah, she said, looking at me with a mix of seriousness and sincerity. I think I've been so focused on how I felt in the moment that I didn't realize you were just trying to help me. I don't always get it, but I know you want what's best for me. I felt a lump form in my throat. I had been waiting for this moment, hoping that Emily would finally understand the reason behind my actions, but hearing her say it out loud made everything feel like it was falling into place. I just want you to know, she continued, that I'm really trying. I don't always show it, but I'm working on being better. I'm trying to listen more. And just like that, I realized how far we had come. There were still moments when we clashed, moments when she tested my patience, but I could see her growth. She was learning, not just from me, but on her own, how to take responsibility and how to communicate. "I'm proud of you, Emily," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I've always been proud of you. We're both learning, and that's okay." We sat there for a while in comfortable silence, the weight of our journey together hanging between us, but in a good way. It felt like we were both finally on the same page. Looking back, I realized that standing my ground with Emily wasn't easy. It felt like I was risking our relationship, but I knew it was necessary for her growth. Teaching her responsibility and respect wasn't about being harsh. It was about showing her the value of accountability and the importance of being a good person. But more than anything, this experience taught me that parenting isn't just about guiding your kids. It's about listening to them, understanding their perspective, and being willing to adjust when things aren't working. Have you ever had a similar experience with your kids or a loved one, where standing your ground led to tension, but eventually led to growth? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories. Drop them in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Parenting can be tough, but we all need support and understanding along the way. We're all in this together.